Our next speaker, Rebecca Stoeckle, is Vice President of Education Development Center's Health and Human Development Division. Rebecca's aim is to use innovative design elements and maximize impact to reach specific audience in the training efforts. As the mother of 4, I know that there are at least 4 ways of learning, and as Stephen told us, there are probably 7 billion. We need to be able to create both high-impact strategies and individually targeted educational processes. Please welcome Rebecca Stoeckle. By the way, before Rebecca comes in, I did forget to tell you that Steve is a neuroscientist, which you probably understood from his speech. Thank you. Rebecca.
Thank you, Ingrid. I have to confess, I was standing behind the curtain thinking I've got to come on and make the case that technology-enabled learning can be as joyful and as interactive as a Montessori classroom, and that it can prepare young learners to be engineers and entrepreneurs and really change the world. And I have 10 minutes. So Chelsea Clinton said we need lots of sweat at this conference. I'm contributing mightily right away. I actually think I'd like to begin by affirming what the Crown Princess asked us to do this morning, and that is to listen to young people, to hear them, and to see what they have to say. I'm going to show a short video of a young man who participated in a technology-blended online course in South Africa. He's a young entrepreneur, and he's going to be much more effective than I could. Isn't technology amazing? There it goes. Oops. I spoke too soon.
I think maybe business was my call. I used to buy some packets of sweets and I would sell those sweets to other children at school. I love not to be dependent to some other people, and it's good when you start earning your own money, when you start to see that you can save a little for yourself. I run a small internet cafe business here in Kailicha. Technology advances every day and people need to use computers, they need to use internet, they need to communicate with other people. I felt like there's a need for these services in the community. I got started with 2 computers. It was really small, then it was a challenge. I struggled to manage the operations of the business. It was running, but it wasn't running very well. It was last year in August when I decided to attend the training for HP Life. It was actually interesting and at the same time exciting to see how to manage the operations of the business, how to manage the finances of the business, and how to communicate with your clients. It was great when we were taught on financial management because that's the other side I was really struggling on. The most important thing I have learned with HP Life is to do things quicker in a very, very professional way. After my training at HP Life, I decided to restructure my whole business. Now everything is progressing very well. Thank you to HP for coming into my life.
There's the joy in that young man's story. This is a cell phone tower in the Masai Mara, and I think there are a lot of people in the audience who travel around the world, and I'm sure, raise your hand if you've seen a cell phone or a cell phone tower in a context that you can hardly believe. Yeah? I think it's become sort of a trite thing to say that broadband is now everywhere and that PCs and tablets and cell phones are becoming ubiquitous. And the transformative thing about that, of course, is that it opens up access to young learners who otherwise would not be able to participate. And by that I mean a young girl in Afghanistan who is shut out of the classroom because girls are not permitted to learn, or a young person in Bangladesh who may need to work during school hours but has time available in the evening when they could be participating in learning. So that transformative access is really important, but access isn't everything. of course, because just the words on the page or even a video of a really fantastic physics lecture, that's not how real learning happens, and we know that. We need relevance and feasibility and scalability to make sure that we're really bringing knowledge and changing lives. And I'm going to give 3 short case examples of technology-enabled interventions that we've developed, each of which I think makes a slightly different point about what we can do. I want to start by affirming what we've heard over and over again, that young learners really need to be in charge of their own education. They need the opportunity to customize their learning experience and to be deeply engaged with it. It has to be relevant, and that means we have to begin by working with them at the very outset of our design processes to be sure that we understand what they need and how they want to learn. You know, we noted, I said already that cell phones are becoming ubiquitous, and actually, they're so cheap now, you see them everywhere. The limiting factor is increasingly the cost of the data plan. I've been in places in Africa where families spend more for their monthly data plan than they do for food. And so this young lady is using a very simple feature phone on which is loaded a basic literacy program that we developed that lives on a small memory card. And it can be loaded into this feature phone, and that means that that young lady and her classmates in Mali can learn how to read and write, and therefore think of the opportunities that that opens up to them. And they can do it anytime, anywhere, and at no cost. I also want to note that because this content and this experience is so valuable to these young learners, we now have a major telecom partner who is helping us to distribute this elsewhere in Western Africa, because they know that that content is value added for their customers. It helps their business model, and it means that this is sustainable. And there's nothing that matters more than sustainability in the long run. Here's another classroom. I'm sorry to say we've got students behind the desk, but in a way, it actually helps me to make my point that in many contexts, not just in the developing world, the limiting factor in really good education is the quality of the teaching and the instruction. And we're going to hear later in the panel from someone who's working with the Khan Academy that pioneered the so-called flip the classroom model. I think that's a really great example of how that technology can circumvent that limitation in teacher training and preparation. This is a much more low-tech endeavor, and in that way it's really helpful in some less resource contexts. If you squint, you can see on the table here a very small, inexpensive device that sits on a tabletop, and it converts an ordinary cell phone into an MP3 player. And using that, we can transmit voice and data into the classroom to bring high-quality interactive education. And when I say that, it's not just a lesson. These are soap opera-style storytelling and then related exercises that the students do in pairs and small groups and going out into their community to learn about things like money management and how to start or build a business. This is happening in Somalia, which is a very tough learning environment. We've got great learning outcomes and data showing that. And interestingly, the teachers really welcome it as well. So it's a nice model for a relatively low-tech intervention. The last example I'm going to show is actually sort of on the other end of the scale. It's EDC's first foray into the so-called MOOC space, massive open online courses that are really one of the things that are changing the world. We designed this, again, with support from HP to support young learners around the world who want to start or grow a business. And we're now in operation. We have users in every country in the world except for, last time I checked, Greenland and the Central African Republic. So if you know somebody there, I want their email. I want to get them on the map that shows where we're operating. We need to build tools that are clearly connected to the work that people need to do. And so we do a lot of formative research to understand what are the real-life contexts, challenges, problems that these young learners will have in their environment. And I want to just scroll quickly through a couple of pragmatic features that we've developed to help to engage that very broad target audience digitally. Because we know we're working with hundreds of thousands of learners around the world, we want to offer not just a course, but a learning community. And so we build social learning features that allow them to connect with one another and with mentors and with markets for their goods and services, and to themselves become full and active participants in the global community. We use low bandwidth, low literacy pedagogy like fotonovelas because we know that storytelling is a great way to create empathy. And in many traditional cultures, storytelling is how wisdom is transmitted. It's how young people learn to address problems and figure out what's the right thing to do. It's also pretty cheap to produce, which matters. Because we're online, we can offer training in many languages. HP Life is currently online, live in English and in Spanish. By the end of the year, we'll be fully functional in French and Arabic and in Portuguese, and boy, we're chasing Chinese as hard as we can so that we can be everywhere in the world. And I think this business of being able to offer people what the learning in their native language is very important. I was pleased to see that there's a session tomorrow that's partially in Norwegian. That seems right and fitting. I think it's a form of respect to offer that to people. This is an op-ed that appeared in the New York Times around the beginning of this year, and it got a lot of play and excitement because it seemed to capture the transformative promise of online learning to really bring access to all kinds of learners around the world who've been shut out of the equation. But you know what? Just a couple of weeks later, the New York Times editorial board printed this caveat that said, wait a minute, let's not move too fast because online learning doesn't yet work as well as we want it to for our most vulnerable learners. So I hope if you're building an online course or you're developing a mobile app, come talk to me. We have a lot of lessons learned. But also please consider these questions. When you're thinking about your content and your instructional design, engage with your learners at the front end. If you can, use what's called a human-centered design process that sends your designers out into the field to really live and work alongside in the context in which your learners will be learning. When you're building your technical design, keep in mind what is going to be feasible in your user's context. Will they be able to use streaming video? Are they learning primarily on a mobile phone? And if so, design for what can be effective on that very small screen. And finally, take into account how you're going to do the implementation. Will it be a flip the classroom model? Will it be a direct-to-consumer model like most MOOCs are at this time? And how's that going to be sustained over time? It's really critical to engage with local partners who can take on and own your intervention. Many of you probably recognize this photograph. It's Tahrir Square on the night of, I believe, February 18th, 2011. Just days before thousands of young people came together with their passion and their idealism and their cell phones to change the world. It's possible. It's happening right now. But we've seen in the years since that moment that change will not be for good. And by that I mean positive change and also sustained change unless we continue to engage. We as adults need to be transmitting, working alongside, sharing our wisdom, getting wisdom from the young people, and making sure that the change that happens is good and is sustained. So I hope you'll get out there and join in this process. Thank you so much.